Carl Jung predicts 5 ways to make money by being yourself. Carl Jung once said, "You are not what happened to you. You are what you choose to become." In today's world, where authenticity is more valuable than imitation, this truth carries the power to transform not just your soul, but also your financial reality. Imagine if the very qualities you've been hiding, your intuition, creativity, and individuality, are the keys to making money by simply being yourself. That's exactly what Jung foresaw. And in this video from Spiritual Wisdom, we'll explore 5 powerful ways to turn self-knowledge into prosperity. Before we dive in, I want to hear from you. Do you believe being authentic can be more profitable than following the crowd? Share your thoughts in the comments below, because your journey of growth begins with that one choice. 1. Shadow-based storytelling. Shadow-based storytelling is the art of transforming struggles, traumas, and the hidden shadow within you into living stories that heal. Instead of being a burden, the shadow becomes a source of wisdom and creativity. Carl Jung taught us that the shadow is not our enemy, but our most faithful teacher. And when you dare to speak from that place of raw honesty, you not only liberate yourself, but also extend a hand to others who are silently carrying the same weight. In today's world, where curated perfection dominates, authenticity shines brighter than any mask. People are no longer moved by flawless images. They are drawn to voices that echo their own pain and resilience. Voices that prove healing and transformation are possible. That is why storytelling rooted in the shadow holds immense value spiritually, emotionally, and even financially. Sharing authentically through books, podcasts, courses, or creative projects creates a ripple effect of resonance. When someone listens to a podcast where you confess your journey through grief, or reads a chapter where you describe overcoming rejection, they are not consuming content. They are experiencing themselves through your story. This is the miracle of resonance. Your scars mirror their wounds. Your healing offers them hope, and your courage awakens theirs. That is why people are willing to invest in these creations. They are not paying for a product. They are investing in connection, in guidance, and in the proof that they too can rise. The shadow, once a silent enemy, becomes a trusted business partner because it generates the kind of authenticity that no amount of surface-level advice can replicate. This practice aligns seamlessly with spirituality and spiritual awakening. For centuries, cultures passed wisdom through parables and myths, teaching the deepest truths by embedding them in human stories. Today, when you share your own shadow tales, you continue this sacred tradition. The only difference is that your stage is bigger. You are not limited to a campfire or temple, but can speak to the entire world through digital platforms. A YouTube video can reach thousands. A podcast can travel across continents. A self-published book can land in the hands of someone who desperately needs to know they are not alone. Your shadow becomes a global language, carrying both healing energy and financial reward. At its core, shadow-based storytelling is also about reclaiming your power. Instead of hiding the wounds that once silenced you, you reframe them into lessons and pathways. When you say, "I was broken, but I found light," you provide a roadmap for someone still lost in the dark. This act is deeply spiritual because it transforms suffering into service. The reward is twofold: the liberation of your own spirit and the awakening of those who receive your story. And within the structure of modern life, this healing exchange can sustain you financially as well. People eagerly pay for the clarity a course brings, the wisdom a coaching session offers, or the courage a book instills, because what they are really buying is transformation, something beyond price. In practical terms, applying this principle begins with reflection. Look back at the defining struggles of your life, the heartbreaks, failures, traumas, and silent battles. Identify the wisdom they forced you to uncover. Then shape those lessons into a story that can be shared. Write it, record it, speak it, or create art from it. Do not fear imperfection, because vulnerability itself is the magnet of connection. Jung reminded us that the most terrifying act is to accept oneself completely, yet it is also the act that generates the deepest bond with others. Vulnerability turns your shadow into light, and that light into livelihood. Shadow-based storytelling proves that money and meaning can coexist, that spirituality and prosperity are not opposites but companions. By weaving your scars into stories, you transform them into bridges. By offering your authentic truth, you invite others to discover their own. This is not only a way of making money by being yourself, it is a sacred act of turning wounds into wisdom, shadows into service, and authenticity into abundance. Comment below. My shadow is my superpower. If you're ready to turn your hidden truth into your greatest source of abundance. 2. Soul-led guidance. Carl Jung once said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." And in today's chaotic world, that privilege is also becoming a path to prosperity. You don't need to be certified by an institution when you've been initiated by life itself. If you've faced pain, navigated darkness, and risen from your own ashes, then you are already qualified in the most sacred way. Your lived experience, your heartbreaks, your breakthroughs, your awakenings is not a liability. It's your legacy. In a time when people are no longer seeking surface-level advice, but instead longing for depth, transformation, and real human connection, your soul-led wisdom is not only welcomed, it is necessary. You are not here to impress anyone with polished perfection. You are here to walk beside those who are just now entering the storms you've already survived. In this era of spiritual awakening, being yourself fully, freely, and without shame is the most magnetic form of leadership. People are no longer buying information, they're investing in transformation. And that shift is spiritual. What used to be seen as soft skills, intuition, empathy, presence are now the currency of the new economy. Intelligence is no longer measured by credentials, but by embodiment. Carl Jung taught us that until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. But once you've made that unconscious material conscious, once you've met your shadow and danced with your inner child, you become a guide for those still trapped in the maze of their own minds. Your healing becomes a map. Your presence becomes a mirror. This is not about being a guru. This is about being a witness to someone who sees, listens, and holds space without judgment. In doing so, you become a coach, a mentor, a soul guide not through authority, but through authenticity. This is where spiritual wisdom meets practical life. You've overcome emotional abuse. You can help others regulate their nervous systems. You've walked through identity loss and come out with clarity. You can guide others through their own unraveling. Your life has already given you the curriculum. Now it's about offering it back, not in arrogance, but in reverence. There is someone out there praying for a voice like yours, a presence like yours, a story like yours. And when you show up on a podcast, on a coaching call, in a piece of writing, you become the answer to their silent questions. That's not just powerful, that's profitable. Because value is no longer in how much you know, but in how deeply you've lived and how generously you give from that well. This is a call to remember that you are your own certification. Your emotions, your failures, your scars, they all belong. You don't need to perform spiritual intelligence. You just need to embody it. Let the wisdom you've integrated become your business. Let your transformation become your offering. And as you do, you'll realize that your story isn't just for you, it's a bridge. A bridge between someone's suffering and someone's breakthrough. You are not just meant to survive. You are meant to serve, to guide, and yes, to be financially supported while doing so. Because when you lead with soul, the universe provides. And when you trust your spiritual intelligence, abundance becomes the natural side effect. Have you ever followed your soul's guidance and watched abundance unfold? If yes, share your story in the comments so others can be inspired. If not yet, comment below. I will listen to my soul, and let's walk this path of spiritual wisdom together. 3. Creative transmutation, art from the soul. Your creativity is not a side hobby. It is your soul's language, your spiritual fingerprint in a world starving for authenticity. What Carl Jung saw long before the world caught on is now a living truth. Your uniqueness is not a flaw. It's a form of currency. In this new era of consciousness, where spirituality and spiritual development are becoming central to how we live and work, your original expression is no longer optional. It is essential. Every part of you that once felt too strange, too emotional, too complex to be accepted by the world is now exactly what the world is seeking. Your weird ideas, your sensitive intuition, your quiet longings, they are not distractions. They are divine instructions. When you channel those raw energies into forms of expression, into poetry, artwork, design, tarot readings, digital offerings, storytelling, you are doing more than creating. You are translating your soul into something others can touch, feel, and resonate with. And that resonance is what people pay for. Not polish, not perfection, not strategy, resonance. Because today, people are not drawn to what looks best. They're drawn to what feels true. They want art that speaks to their unseen wounds. They want words that echo what they haven't found the courage to say. They want symbols that make them feel understood in their quiet chaos. And only the kind of person who has journeyed through their own depths can offer that. You don't need to go viral. You don't need a studio, a label, or a degree. You need one thing: the courage to bring forth what's already inside you. To stop hiding the most beautiful parts of your soul just because they don't look like anyone else's. Because the truth is, your originality is your algorithm. The right people will find you when you finally become visible to yourself. You were never meant to appeal to everyone. You were meant to activate someone. And when you begin to view your life as art, when your story becomes your offering, your healing becomes your voice, your tears become your texture, you shift from survival to self-expression, from hustle to alignment. This is the power of creative transmutation. It's not just about making things. It's about turning what almost broke you into something that builds others. It's about honoring your pain enough to give it purpose. And that purpose becomes prosperity. That is what spiritual wisdom looks like in action. This is not a fantasy. It is the natural outcome of embodying your spiritual development. Because wealth, in its highest form, flows where alignment lives. So take your journal entries, your drawings, your voice notes, your raw emotions, and mold them into something that reflects your inner truth. Then release them, not to impress, but to connect. Not to perform, but to liberate. Not to chase money, but to awaken meaning. In doing so, you become the artist of your own reality. And that is the most powerful form of abundance there is. Leave a like and subscribe to Spiritual Wisdom. And don't forget to turn on the notification bell so you never miss content that awakens your creative power and aligns your soul with prosperity. Comment below. I deserve to live a financially prosperous life. If you believe your art is your abundance. 4. Microcontent oracles, speaking your frequency. Platforms like TikTok, YouTube Shorts, and Instagram Reels are no longer just playgrounds for entertainment. They've become modern-day altars for spiritual expression, where your energy is your offering and your voice is your vibration. Carl Jung once said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." And in this era of spiritual awakening, being who you are is not just a personal victory, it's a professional strategy. When you speak from your truth, especially in micro-content form, you're not just making videos, you're emitting frequencies. You become a lighthouse in a sea of noise, guiding others who are silently searching for a reflection of their own authenticity. It's not about filters, scripts, or production. It's about resonance. In a digital world oversaturated with perfection, it's your rawness, your imperfection, your spiritual wisdom that draws people in. People are no longer buying into polished personas. They're investing in presence. That moment when you speak from your soul, even in under a minute, becomes a sacred portal for connection, income, and impact. Jung would say you're giving form to the unconscious, and in doing so, you're not just healing yourself, you're awakening others. The subconscious mind doesn't respond to logic, it responds to frequency. And that's why micro-content is so powerful. One short video recorded in a messy room on a tired day with no script and full sincerity can ripple across the internet like a divine transmission. In that moment, you're not just seen, you're felt. And that is the currency of the new world. Monetization in this age of consciousness isn't about funnels or formulas. It's about frequency alignment. It's not about creating a brand. It's about becoming a beacon. The part of you that once felt too weird, too deep, too sensitive, or too emotional is now your greatest asset. That shadow side, the one you thought you had to hide, is actually where your magic lives. When you speak from that space, unguarded, honest, and spiritually aware, you activate magnetism. You don't need to shout to be heard anymore. You just need to resonate. That's why spiritual content creators who whisper truth often go further than influencers who scream trends. Your story, your struggles, your insights, even your silence, all of it has value when spoken with integrity. Jung's concept of individuation teaches that the journey to wholeness requires integrating all parts of yourself. And the moment you allow those parts to speak through you online, you become whole in public and profitable in private. You are not here to convince anyone. You are here to remember yourself out loud. Your microcontent is a mirror for those who have forgotten who they are. In the digital marketplace of the soul, your voice is sacred commerce. You are not a product. You are a presence. And your presence is the most valuable product of all. Every time you speak your frequency, you realign your timeline. You call in those who were energetically waiting for you to show up. You collapse time by collapsing masks. And in doing so, you attract opportunities, partnerships, clients, and community, not because you followed a strategy, but because you followed your spirit. That's the paradox of modern success. When you stop trying to be seen and start trying to be sincere, the right eyes find you. That's not algorithmic, that's alchemical. So share your 1-minute truth like it's a prayer. Post your story like it's scripture. Record your insight like it's a prophecy. In the age of energy, spirituality is the strategy, and the shortest distance between you and abundance is the courage to be yourself, consistently, publicly, and unapologetically. If you believe your voice carries a frequency that can change your reality, declare it now in the comments. I speak my truth, and it attracts abundance. 5. Conscious community building. Carl Jung once said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." And in today's world, where artificial personas dominate and mass appeal often overshadows authenticity, this insight has become not only a path to inner peace, but also a smart, spiritual strategy for creating wealth. In an age where people are waking up spiritually, true intelligence is being redefined. It's no longer just about how much you know, but how deeply you feel, how consciously you lead, and how authentically you show up. That's why conscious community building has become one of the most powerful and sustainable ways to make money, not through force or manipulation, but through resonance, trust, and presence. Instead of obsessing over viral content or follower counts, the real currency today is energy, your ability to hold space for healing, growth, and authenticity. Whether you're hosting sacred circles on Zoom, building a private group on Discord, or offering exclusive guidance through Patreon or a membership site, what matters most is not the size of your community, but the soul of it. People are no longer looking for influencers. They're searching for safe havens, for spaces where they can be seen, heard, and transformed. When you offer that with integrity, income becomes a natural side effect, not because you're selling something, but because you're serving something real. Jung reminded us, you are not what happened to you. You are what you choose to become. When you choose to become a sacred mirror for others, a space where truth can be spoken and pain can be alchemized, you don't just build a business, you build a sanctuary. This kind of community doesn't just grow, it deepens. It doesn't just convert, it connects. It doesn't just survive, it thrives. Because people don't stay for content, they stay for energy, for the feeling of being safe, understood, and spiritually supported. In this new spiritual economy, depth is more valuable than reach. A group of 10 deeply aligned, emotionally invested members can create more impact and, yes, more income than 10,000 disengaged strangers. That's because what you're offering isn't a product, it's a portal, a doorway to healing, a circle of trust. And people will return to that sacred space again and again when they feel its frequency matches their evolution. So instead of chasing validation through numbers, turn inward. Build slow. Build consciously. build with care. Let your spiritual wisdom, your life experience, your healing journey, and even your shadow be the foundation of your brand. When you stop performing and start embodying, your energy shifts and people feel it. And when they feel safe in your energy, they support it, not because they're buying something, but because they're becoming someone. And that, more than any marketing strategy, is how spiritual intelligence creates wealth. If this message has awakened something within you, declare it in the comments. I believe my community is my currency. I'm building with purpose and alignment. And so, the true wealth that Carl Jung foresaw is not about chasing trends, but about daring to live as your authentic self. When you honor who you are, you unlock the doors not only to inner fulfillment, but also to material abundance. If this message resonated with you, don't forget to like this video, share it with others who need this wisdom, and subscribe to Spiritual Wisdom. Be sure to turn on notifications so you won't miss our upcoming videos that continue guiding you on the path of growth, transformation, and true prosperity. Carl Jung warned us, the moment an empath snaps, it's game over for the narcissist. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. Carl Jung. In today's world, where empaths often carry the weight of silence while narcissists weaponize charm, Jung's wisdom cuts through the noise like a sword of clarity. Have you ever felt the moment you stop absorbing their pain and start reclaiming your power? That's not weakness, it's your awakening. This video isn't just a warning, it's a mirror for those who feel deeply, love fiercely, and finally say, enough. What happens when the empath snaps isn't destruction, it's liberation. Comment below, I choose my peace. If you've ever walked away from emotional manipulation and stepped into your own light, let's begin this journey together. 1. The narcissist's mask is a survival mechanism, not confidence. Narcissists are not confident, they are terrified. Beneath their polished surface lies a primitive fear known as annihilation anxiety, a subconscious terror of psychological death. Their charisma is not power, it's camouflage. What looks like arrogance is often just the armor of someone who was once emotionally abandoned, dismissed, or deeply wounded. In childhood, when authenticity was punished or ignored, they crafted a persona, a false self to survive. This persona becomes their default identity, built not to thrive, but to avoid collapse. It is a constant performance, a rehearsed version of strength played on a loop to distract from the internal chaos they cannot bear to confront. At the core of their being is a single crippling belief: I am unlovable. And rather than risk this truth being seen, they manipulate, control, and deflect to keep others at a safe distance. Carl Jung taught that neurosis is always a substitute for legitimate suffering, and in the case of the narcissist, the substitution is a lifelong act. They swap vulnerability for control, connection for domination, and self-reflection for projection. Their inability to self-soothe creates a hunger for admiration that no amount of praise can ever satisfy. Their need to win is not about defeating others. It's about outrunning their own internal void. This makes relationships with narcissists profoundly disorienting for empaths, who feel everything with unbearable clarity. The empath senses the suffering, the fragmentation, the buried child inside the narcissist, But spiritual awakening is not about rescuing others from their masks. It's about recognizing when someone refuses to remove it, no matter how much love you offer. In today's world, where attention is currency and authenticity is rare, narcissistic traits are often mistaken for leadership or confidence. Social media amplifies this confusion, rewarding the curated self and punishing the real one. That's why the spiritually awakened empath must learn to see beyond appearances and honor intuition over illusion. When an empath finally snaps, it is not rage that emerges, it is clarity. The clarity that you were never supposed to carry someone else's wound, that their rejection was a shield, not a verdict, that their silence was self-protection, not proof of your inadequacy. In that sacred moment of realization, the empath doesn't fight back. They walk away, not to punish, but to reclaim. Spiritual wisdom teaches that presence is the greatest mirror. And once you stop dancing around the narcissist's insecurities, the performance collapses. The game ends because you're no longer playing. Your withdrawal is not weakness. It is power matured. It is the embodiment of the truth that you cannot fix what someone refuses to face. And when you stop overgiving, over-explaining, and overextending, you become untouchable to those who feed off confusion. You become the calm that exposes the chaos, the mirror that reflects the unhealed. And in that stillness, something rare is born. Self-respect that no narcissist can fracture, because it no longer seeks approval in the eyes of someone who cannot see clearly. You no longer beg to be loved by someone who's forgotten how to love themselves. You become the ending of their illusion and the beginning of your freedom. Comment below, I see behind the mask. If you're ready to reclaim your power through spiritual wisdom and self-awareness. 2. Behind closed doors, narcissists battle midnight panic. Behind the curated confidence and charm of a narcissist lies a hidden battlefield few ever see, a war that erupts most violently around 3 in the morning. When silence exposes the truth they've spent their entire lives avoiding. This is the hour when the crowd is gone, the applause has faded, and all that remains are the whispers in their mind accusing them of being a fraud. Beneath their outward bravado is a child frozen in shame, paralyzed by the fear of being unmasked. Their mind becomes a courtroom where they stand trial for every word spoken, every action taken, every glance received, obsessively replaying conversations and scanning their memories for imagined flaws. They don't do this for growth. They do it to survive the self-hate echoing through their inner world. Their rituals, whether it's compulsive shopping, meaningless sex, or mind-numbing substances, are not signs of power, but of spiritual disconnection. Desperate attempts to drown out the voice that says, "You're not enough." What they fear most isn't losing control of others. It's losing control of the illusion they've built to protect their fragile identity. Carl Jung warned us that people will go to extraordinary lengths to avoid facing their own souls, and the narcissist embodies this truth to a tragic degree. They wear arrogance like armor, but it is crafted from fear, not superiority. Their need to dominate, to manipulate, to be the center of every story comes not from inner strength, but from spiritual emptiness. They demand constant validation, not because they believe they're special, but because, deep down, they suspect they're worthless without it. And when they sense someone, especially an empath, might see through the mask, panic sets in. That's when the emotional manipulation intensifies. That's when the guilt-tripping, gaslighting, and silent treatment begin. Not because they're strong, but because they're terrified. They don't want you to see who they really are. And the more spiritually aware you become, the more dangerous your presence feels to them. Because your clarity is a mirror they cannot bear to face. But the real shift happens when the empath, after enduring cycles of confusion and compassion, finally reaches the edge, not out of anger, but out of awakening. When the empath snaps, it's not a breakdown, it's a breakthrough. It is the moment the people-pleasing ends and the self-respect begins. It is the sacred point in spiritual development where you stop dimming your light to protect their shadow. You stop sacrificing your peace to keep the connection. You stop rescuing someone who was never drowning, only performing. And in that moment, the power dynamic shatters, because nothing is more threatening to a narcissist than an empath who has awakened to their own worth. You begin to set boundaries, speak truth without fear, and reclaim the energy you once gave away too freely. And suddenly, their tactics no longer work. Their silence doesn't hurt. Their chaos doesn't pull you back in. You become emotionally untouchable, not because you've hardened, but because you've healed. Spirituality isn't about endlessly giving. It's about knowing when giving becomes enabling. Your growth is not betrayal, it is liberation. And as they spiral in the quiet corners of the night, still haunted by their unhealed wounds, you rise not in revenge, but in radiant peace. 3. Emotional blindness and the empath trap. Many narcissists live behind a well-crafted emotional mask, not out of confidence, but because they suffer from alexithymia, the inability to name and process their emotions. They don't truly feel their feelings. They just react to them. Fear becomes anger, and shame erupts as rage. This is not emotional maturity. It is emotional blindness. So what do? They unconsciously gravitate toward empaths, those with spiritual intelligence, depth of insight, and a rare aura of sensitivity, because empaths can feel what narcissists cannot. Empaths become emotional translators, decoding unspoken fear, absorbing suppressed pain, and attempting to create connection where there is only confusion. But what starts as intuitive understanding soon transforms into spiritual exploitation. This is not love. It's a dynamic of energetic imbalance, one where the empath becomes the source of nourishment and the narcissist the taker of light. And here lies the deeper wound. Intimacy, which should bring people together, feels like death to the narcissist. Vulnerability exposes the truth, and that threatens their carefully crafted persona. So they create a push-pull dance, luring the empath in with flattery and false depth, only to push them away the moment emotional closeness touches their unhealed core. Carl Jung, the father of analytical psychology, warned that people will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own souls. And this truth echoes loudly in every relationship where the empath becomes the mirror, and the narcissist can't bear to look. When the empath tries to help, they're met with silence. When they love harder, they're met with withdrawal. And when they finally begin to wake up, they realize the connection was never mutual. It was emotional survival for one and spiritual sacrifice for the other. But when an empath snaps, it's not rage, it's clarity. It's no longer mistaking spiritual wisdom for suffering in silence. It's recognizing the manipulation wrapped in affection and the projection masquerading as intimacy. The moment an empath stops translating emotions for someone who refuses to learn their own language, the entire illusion collapses. That's when the dynamic ends, not with a fight, but with awareness. The empath walks away, no longer trying to heal someone who's weaponizing their pain. This is not just psychological freedom. It is a profound spiritual awakening. It is the reclaiming of power, of presence, of peace. True emotional intelligence is not rescuing those who exploit your compassion. It's setting boundaries that honor your worth. You are not here to be consumed. You are not here to be broken open and left to rebuild yourself alone. You are here to feel, to grow, and to be met with the same depth you give. Carl Jung taught us that the most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. And when the empath does, the need to fix others disappears. The narcissist's game ends not in confrontation, but in quiet liberation. This is the sacred breaking point where the empath chooses clarity over chaos, truth over illusion, and spiritual strength over emotional servitude. Stay connected with our growing community of spiritual wisdom by subscribing to the channel. Here, we explore the deep emotional patterns that shape our lives and break free together. Remember, your empathy is not a weakness, it's your superpower. You are not here to be drained, but to rise. Don't forget to like, share, and turn on notifications so you never miss the healing you deserve. 4. Envy and control are not power. They're survival. Real power is not rooted in domination, but in emotional clarity and spiritual presence. Narcissists, however, confuse control with power because they live in a world shaped by fear, not truth. Carl Jung once said, "Where love rules, there is no will to power, and where power predominates, their love is lacking." Narcissists operate through a zero-sum lens. If someone else shines, they feel dimmed. If someone else succeeds, they feel diminished. That insecurity breeds envy, and envy becomes a weapon. They criticize those who love them, devalue those who support them, and undermine those who reflect their own lack of self. You'll notice this pattern in how they respond to your growth. The brighter you become, the more they try to dim you, not because they hate your light, but because they've never learned how to generate their own. Their survival depends on control, and their tactics of love bombing, silent treatment, praise, then punish cycles are not rooted in cruelty, but in a desperate need to regulate their inner chaos. This is not power. This is panic disguised as precision. They orchestrate connection through manipulation because genuine intimacy terrifies them. When you're spiritually awake, you begin to see this clearly. Control is not connection. Love does not need to be staged to be real. But to someone who's only known love through emotional conditions and psychological performance, freedom feels dangerous. This is where the tragedy unfolds, because in trying to control the relationship, they drain it of the very authenticity they crave. The more they manipulate, the less real the love becomes. And then they use that absence as proof that love was never real to begin with. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy, built on fear and reinforced by spiritual blindness. Your role, especially as an empath, is not to absorb their wounds as your truth. Your sensitivity is not a flaw. It's a form of intelligence, a reflection of your spiritual wisdom. In a world that worships control and punishes feeling, your emotional depth is revolutionary. But you must protect it. You must remember, that just because someone fears abandonment does not mean you must abandon yourself to stay. Their fear does not justify your self-erasure. You cannot heal someone by becoming less of who you are. In modern life, this dynamic shows up everywhere. Relationships where you're constantly apologizing for existing. Families where love is conditional. Workplaces where charisma masks toxicity. When you start awakening, the veil lifts. And once you see the pattern, you can't unsee it. So you stop shrinking. You stop explaining. You stop carrying the emotional weight of someone who refuses to feel their own. You realize that boundaries are not walls, they're doors. And you don't lock people out with them. You simply stop letting chaos in. The moment you honor your peace more than their projection is the moment the game ends. And not because you won, it's because you stopped playing. That is the essence of spiritual awakening. Not just realizing what you deserve, but refusing to negotiate it any longer. 5. Criticism is a tool to keep you off balance. Their constant criticism isn't random. It's calculated to keep you off balance, second-guessing yourself, and slowly detaching from your inner truth. It's a silent war, where every disapproving glance, every helpful correction chips away at your confidence and subtly teaches you to seek their approval instead of trusting your own voice. This isn't always delivered with open cruelty. In fact, many narcissists genuinely believe they are offering you guidance. But that's what makes it so insidious. They weaponize concern, wrapping control in the disguise of care. Carl Jung once said, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely." And that's exactly what they don't want you to do. Because your self-acceptance threatens the power they hold over you. If you become anchored in your own worth, their ability to manipulate through emotional destabilization disappears. They can't dominate someone who no longer doubts themselves. The target is always your pride or your deepest insecurity, those raw places within you that still ache for validation. And every time you react, every time you get defensive or hurt, they take it as proof that they still have control. But here's the truth. Their criticism isn't about truth. It's about control. It's about making sure you stay small enough to be manageable. When you begin to see this dynamic clearly, you realize it has nothing to do with your growth and everything to do with their fear of losing emotional superiority. Spirituality teaches us to become the observer, to rise above reaction and step into inner alignment. When you finally stop absorbing their words like gospel and instead begin to see them as reflections of their own unresolved pain, something in you shifts. That shift is the birth of spiritual development. It's the moment when clarity replaces confusion, when your peace becomes more important than their praise. You begin to reclaim your energy, no longer pouring it into convincing them of your worth, but instead into grounding yourself in it. And that is when the empath snaps not in rage, but in realization. That moment isn't loud. It's not dramatic. It's the quiet ending of a game you never agreed to play. You stop explaining. You stop apologizing. You stop shrinking to fit their comfort zone. You rise not to fight, but to walk away. Because you now understand that their need to correct you was never about helping you evolve, but about making sure you never outgrow them. And once you choose your spiritual growth over their approval, it's game over. Have you ever felt that criticism was used to confuse you, not help you? If you see it now with clarity, declare your truth in the comments. I trust my intuition, not their control. 6. They understand emotions, but cannot feel them. They know how to read your feelings, but they cannot feel them. That's the unsettling truth about many narcissists. They possess cognitive empathy, the ability to intellectually identify your emotions, but they lack effective empathy, the emotional capacity to actually feel what you're feeling. So when they look at you with soft eyes or offer comforting words, it may seem like they care, but something always feels off. That's because what you're witnessing is a performance of a carefully rehearsed act without any emotional resonance. Their intelligence allows them to mimic concern, but it's void of real connection. Carl Jung once said, "People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul." And the narcissist does exactly that. Deep within, they know something is missing. They sense the emotional emptiness, the absence of real connection. But they have spent years, sometimes decades, constructing psychological walls so thick that even they cannot break through them. These walls were built to keep pain out, but in doing so, they also locked love away. You, as an empath, show up like a mirror they never asked for. Your energy, your rare spiritual intelligence, exposes what they've been hiding from: vulnerability, authenticity, and the soul's desire for connection. You don't just speak with emotion, you radiate it. And that spiritual presence threatens everything they've built their identity upon. While they cling to control and image, you move with feeling and depth. That contrast triggers them, not because you've done something wrong, but because you've done something real. Your emotional wisdom lights up the very darkness they've refused to explore. And suddenly, the illusion starts to crack. But here's the twist. The moment you stop tolerating the emotional disconnect, the moment you snap and say, "Enough," that's not your downfall. That is your awakening. That is the spiritual shift where the game ends, not for you, but for the illusion they've maintained. When the empath snaps, it's not rage, it's clarity. It's not revenge, it's revelation. You no longer beg to be felt. You no longer make excuses for being invisible to someone who only sees you when it serves them. You walk away, not because you hate them, but because you finally love yourself. You honor your sensitivity. You protect your soul. You stop being a mirror for their false self and become a reflection of your own truth. This isn't a breakdown, it's your breakthrough. And from that moment forward, nothing is ever the same. You've just reminded them of the one thing they can't control: your inner freedom. Your spiritual wisdom becomes your boundary. Your emotional intelligence becomes your shield. And your awakening becomes the end of their performance. 7. When the mask cracks, narcissistic rage emerges. When the mask of control begins to crack, what erupts from beneath is not confidence, but terror disguised as rage. Narcissistic rage is not born from strength, but from a deep fracture in the false self. When a narcissist is criticized, loses control, feels irrelevant with age, or senses their manipulation no longer works, they suffer what psychology calls a narcissistic injury. This injury threatens their fragile identity, which is often built entirely on performance, praise, and illusion. And when that identity shatters, the rage that follows is not a reaction. It is a survival mechanism. This rage can take many forms: verbal abuse, emotional withdrawal, revisionist storytelling, or the cold act of discarding someone without explanation. It is not calculated evil, but a psychological emergency, a desperate attempt to restore control in a world that no longer reflects their grandiosity. Carl Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." And this perfectly captures the narcissist's dilemma. They are not aware of what drives them, only that they are terrified of being exposed as ordinary, vulnerable, or wrong. What makes this dynamic so dangerous is that those on the receiving end, often empaths, tend to personalize the narcissist's collapse. They question themselves, try to fix the situation, or take on the blame. But in the realm of spirituality and spiritual awakening, the lesson is clear. This was never about you. The narcissist isn't attacking you. They are defending the illusion of who they believe they must be. Their identity depends on admiration and control. Your authenticity, your clarity, your refusal to collapse under manipulation becomes a direct threat to their survival fantasy. And so they rage not to destroy you, but to preserve the mask. The spiritual wisdom here is profound. You must stop trying to soothe someone who uses your compassion as a weapon. In modern relationships, where power games often replace emotional presence, the awakened empath must step back and say, "This energy does not belong to me." Empathy without boundaries becomes self-abandonment, and self-abandonment is the true cost of staying in a cycle of abuse disguised as love. The spiritual path is not about rescuing those who refuse to heal. It is about honoring your own light without guilt. When someone discards you during a moment of rage, rewrites history to make themselves the victim, or punishes you with silence, understand that you are witnessing their internal collapse. Do not absorb their storm. Do not mirror their madness. Your calm is their chaos. Your detachment, their undoing. In the words of Jung, who looks outside, dreams. Who looks inside, awakes. So choose to awaken. Choose truth over illusion. Choose clarity over confusion. Let your spiritual intelligence guide you not into the flames of someone else's self-destruction, but into the quiet knowing that you are not here to be someone's emotional scapegoat. You are here to become whole. If you're still with us, type "I'm concentrating" in the comments. Your focus matters, and your feedback helps us build a stronger spiritual awakening community. Let's keep this energy of spiritual wisdom alive together. 8. The relationship cycle. Fantasy, devaluation, discard. The relationship cycle between an empath and a narcissist is not merely a toxic pattern. It's a deeply spiritual journey disguised as a psychological trap. Carl Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." In the beginning, the narcissist doesn't approach with obvious manipulation. Instead, they arrive with a desperate need to secure attachment, flooding the empath with affection, attention, and validation in a phase known as love bombing. This isn't love, it's survival. The narcissist is terrified of abandonment and is clinging to the illusion of being worthy, seen, and adored. To the empath, this may feel like a spiritual connection, a cosmic encounter with someone who finally sees their soul. But it is actually the beginning of a cycle that threatens their emotional stability and spiritual development. As time passes and the empath begins to show genuine needs for emotional intimacy, reciprocity, and vulnerability, the narcissist's fear begins to rise. They don't see these needs as normal. They see them as dangerous because they threaten the carefully constructed mask they wear. Their identity is built on performance, not authenticity. And so begins the devaluation phase, where the empath is slowly pushed off the pedestal, criticized for being too sensitive, blamed for being needy, and made to feel like a burden simply for expressing normal human emotions. This psychological shift is more than confusing. It's a form of spiritual disorientation. The empath begins to question their worth, their reality, and their intuition. Yet this unraveling is where the deeper transformation begins, because once an empath learns to trust their inner voice and recognize that their emotions are not flaws, but signs of deep intelligence and awareness, they begin to awaken. But the final blow is the discard. This usually happens not when the empath fails the narcissist, but precisely when they offer genuine love. The moment the empath says, "I see you. I accept you," the narcissist panics. Why? Because they've built their entire identity around avoiding being truly seen. To be loved unconditionally means their mask must fall, and that is their greatest terror. So they sabotage the connection, discard the empath, and blame them for the collapse. Ironically, it is when the empath is most spiritually aligned, most honest, most open, that the narcissist retreats the fastest. Here's the truth. This cycle ends the moment the empath snaps not with rage, but with clarity. When the empath finally sees the pattern and walks away with dignity, they don't just break free, they transcend. This is the moment when spirituality becomes more than just an idea. It becomes embodied. True spiritual development begins when you no longer try to heal others to earn love, when you no longer trade your peace for someone's potential, and when you realize that boundaries are not walls, they're sacred lines drawn by your soul. So if you are an empath caught in this cycle, let this be your awakening. You are not here to carry someone else's emotional immaturity. You are here to remember your worth, reclaim your energy, and rise into relationships that reflect the truth of your being. Comment below, "I choose peace over patterns," if you are ready to break the cycle and step into your spiritual power. 9. Aging narcissists and the collapse of the mask. As narcissists grow older, the illusion they've carefully maintained begins to crumble. Their physical allure fades, accolades lose their shine, and the admiration they once manipulated no longer flows so freely. Without this narcissistic supply, they begin to unravel. What once gave them an inflated sense of self was never rooted in truth. It was built on performance, not presence. And when time strips away their props, they're left staring into the emptiness of their own unhealed psyche. Carl Jung warned us that the persona, the mask we wear to face the world, can become a prison when we confuse it with our identity. For the aging narcissist, the collapse of the mask is not just painful, it's terrifying. They're not just losing admiration, they're losing control over the only narrative they ever believed made them valuable. This internal crisis often manifests as heightened paranoia, obsessive control, and emotional volatility. The more irrelevant they feel, the more desperate they become to assert dominance. They micromanage, manipulate, lash out anything to avoid confronting the spiritual emptiness they've denied for decades. Their intelligence, once used to charm or impress, becomes a weapon twisting facts, rewriting history, projecting guilt. Their conversations become about power, not connection. And underneath it all is a soul too afraid to look inward. They cannot bear stillness because stillness reveals the truth. Carl Jung once said, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves." But for the narcissist, that level of self-awareness feels like annihilation. Empaths, on the other hand, feel this decay long before it's visible. You notice the subtle hostility in their words, the manipulative undertones in their affection, the spiritual decay behind their charisma. You try to help, to understand, to rescue, but your love becomes a mirror, reflecting back everything they're trying to hide. You begin to suffer under the weight of their disconnection, and yet you stay until one day you don't. The empath's snap isn't loud or violent. It's silent, resolute, divine. It's the moment you reclaim your soul from the cycle of pleasing someone who only loved your reflection when it served them. This moment, the moment you walk away, is the moment the narcissist faces the very terror they've spent a lifetime escaping: themselves. Without someone to project onto, the aging narcissist spirals deeper into isolation. They become haunted by the very silence they once used as punishment. Their need for validation becomes frantic, but fewer people are listening. And the ones who do stay see through the act. Spiritual wisdom reveals that aging is meant to be a return to essence, a shedding of ego, a softening into truth. But for those who never cultivated an inner life, aging becomes a spiritual reckoning. The narcissist, without the applause, is forced to meet the self they abandoned long ago. And often, they don't recognize who's staring back. 10. Empaths must prioritize strategy over sympathy. You've been conditioned to believe that empathy means endurance, that compassion means tolerating chaos. But the truth is, without strategy, your empathy becomes a trap. Narcissists don't seek love. They seek control masked as connection. And empaths, driven by their need to heal and be understood, often become the perfect supply. The relationship is not built on love, but on a subconscious agreement. The narcissist avoids exposure, and the empath avoids abandonment. This cycle of dysfunction thrives on your silence, your forgiveness, your hope that they'll change. But Carl Jung warned us, people will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own souls. The narcissist projects their darkness onto you, so they never have to see it within themselves. And the empath, until they awaken, absorbs that projection, mistaking it for their own reflection. This is where the spiritual awakening begins, when you realize you are not responsible for their healing, their rage, or their repeated betrayals. The moment you stop needing validation from someone who weaponizes your heart against you, you reclaim your energy. You don't need them to understand your pain, because their power lies in your constant explaining. Stop explaining. Stop defending. Stop justifying your boundaries. The boundary itself is enough. It is your energetic line in the sand, a declaration that your peace is no longer up for negotiation. The gray rock method isn't emotional coldness. It's strategic stillness. It's the act of becoming unresponsive, not because you don't care, but because you've transcended their control game. You become boring to their chaos, invisible to their manipulation, immune to their bait. And that neutrality is your power. The spiritual wisdom here is in the detachment, not the fight. Your role is not to win the argument, it's to exit the arena entirely. Healing is not found in getting closure from a narcissist. It's found in no longer needing it. Let the wound close without their apology. Let the silence be your sanctuary. Let your lack of reaction be your loudest response. The narcissist's greatest fear is not confrontation, it's indifference. When you stop feeding their need for attention, their illusion collapses. And in that collapse, you rise not because you proved them wrong, but because you remembered your worth. This is not just about psychology. It's about energetic sovereignty. You're no longer living from the wound, you're living from the wisdom it gave you. You now understand that your spirituality is not measured by how much you sacrifice, but by how clearly you can walk away from what depletes your soul. You are not abandoning them. You are finally choosing yourself. And in doing so, you break the cycle not only for yourself, but for every empath who's ever mistaken survival for love. 11. True recovery is inner work, not fixing them. True recovery doesn't begin by dissecting the narcissist's behavior. It begins the moment you turn inward and ask why you tolerated it in the first place. Carl Jung once said, "Who looks outside, dreams. Who looks inside, awakes." And in this spiritual awakening, you realize that the narcissist was never the main character of your healing story. They were a mirror, showing you the wounds you were too busy caretaking to confront. Every time you excused their coldness, minimized your needs, or overextended your empathy, it wasn't because you were weak. It was because you had been conditioned to confuse love with sacrifice. But spirituality is the art of remembering. Remembering that you were never meant to be someone's emotional regulator. That your role was never to fix chaos in hopes of receiving breadcrumbs of validation. You were meant to heal the abandonment wounds that whispered, "If I love harder, they'll stay," and face the subconscious belief that love must be earned through pain. Once you begin this inner work, your energy shifts, boundaries become second nature. Self-respect replaces overgiving, and your nervous system no longer seeks the highs and lows of emotional volatility. The narcissist's control loses its grip, not because they change, but because you do. You stop magnetizing those who feed off your light, because your light is no longer dimmed by self-neglect. In this stage of spiritual development, empathy becomes sacred, not something to be exploited, but something to be shared with those who reciprocate. You understand that true compassion includes yourself, that healing isn't about becoming harder, but about becoming whole. And through this wholeness, you step into your power, not with rage, but with clarity, not with bitterness, but with sovereignty. You realize you don't need to fix them. You need to honor you. This is when the game changes. Because when an empath heals, sets boundaries, and protects their peace, the narcissist loses their influence. Not through confrontation, but through disinterest. Not through revenge, but through evolution. You ascend, and in doing so, you leave behind the cycles that once felt like home. This is the essence of spiritual wisdom, not the need to control others, but the courage to transform yourself. Let that be the lesson. Your empathy was never the problem. Your lack of protection around it was. Now, you know better. Now, you choose differently. Thank you for watching Spiritual Wisdom. If this message spoke to something deep within you, trust that it wasn't by accident. Carl Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. So if you felt the shift, the awakening, the moment when the empath rises, honor that power. Don't let it fade. Like this video to affirm your truth. Share it to support others on their journey. And subscribe to our channel to continue walking this path of spiritual wisdom together. And don't forget to hit the notification bell so you never miss a moment that might just change everything. Until next time, stay aware, stay empowered, and stay true to your light.